I'll never forget the sound of the front door slamming behind me. The echo bounced off the walls of what had been my childhood home, just 3 days after we buried my father. My own brother, the man who had shared Christmas mornings and family dinners with me for 28 years, had just thrown me out like I was nothing more than unwanted furniture. "Get out, Emma," Derek had said, his voice cold as winter steel. "This is my house now, my company, my life. You've been riding Dad's coattails long enough." Standing on that front porch with a single suitcase in my hand, staring at the locked door of the house where I'd grown up, I felt something inside me shift. Not break, shift. Like tectonic plates finding a new position before an earthquake. Before we go any further, welcome back to Revenge Stories with Kyle, and if this is your first time watching any of our videos, we encourage you to hit that subscribe button. Your support means the world to us, and it motivates us to continue creating even more powerful stories for you. So stick with us to the very end. And if this story moves you, drop your comments and share with a friend. Now, let's dive back in. My name is Emma Richardson, and 3 months ago, I was 28 years old, living what I thought was a pretty good life. I worked as the marketing director at Richardson and Associates, the construction company my father built from nothing over 30 years. I lived in the family home, taking care of Dad after Mom passed 5 years earlier. I thought my older brother Derek and I were a team, partners in keeping Dad's legacy alive, while he battled the cancer that would eventually take him. I was wrong about a lot of things back then. Derek was 32, 4 years older than me, and had always carried himself like he owned every room he walked into. 6'2", with our father's broad shoulders and that same commanding presence that made people listen when he spoke. He'd been Dad's right-hand man at the company for 8 years, handling the construction side while I managed marketing, client relations, and honestly, most of the day-to-day operations that kept us profitable. But Derek had always been the golden child in his own mind, the firstborn, the son, the one who would naturally inherit Dad's empire. Growing up, I'd watched Derek charm his way through life while I worked twice as hard for half the recognition. When Dad got sick, Derek would show up for the big meetings, the important client dinners, the photo ops. But who do you think was there at 2 in the morning when Dad couldn't sleep because of the pain? Who drove him to every chemo appointment when Derek was too busy with a construction site inspection that somehow always coincided with hospital visits? I'd sacrificed relationships, turned down job offers in other cities, put my entire life on hold to be there for the man who taught me that family comes first, always. While Derek was out networking at golf clubs and industry events, I was holding Dad's hand through the worst nights of his life, learning every detail about the business because Dad wanted to make sure someone truly understood his vision. "Emma's got the sharpest mind I've ever seen," Dad used to say. "She sees the whole picture, not just her piece of it." Derek never seemed to hear those comments, or maybe he heard them and chose to dismiss them, the way he dismissed most things that didn't fit his narrative of being the natural heir to the Richardson kingdom. The cancer took 18 months to kill my father, and during those 18 months, I essentially ran the company. Derek was good at the construction management, don't get me wrong, but I handled everything. Payroll, contracts, vendor relationships, marketing campaigns that increased our revenue by 38% year over year. I knew every employee's name, every project timeline, every client's preferences. Dad knew it too. We'd have long conversations during his treatments about the future of the company, about his dreams for what Richardson and Associates could become. He'd talk about expansion plans, about the importance of treating employees like family, and about building something that would last for generations. "Promise me you'll keep it in the family, Em," he'd say during those quiet moments when the morphine made him philosophical. "Promise me you'll protect what we built." I promised. Of course I promised. When Dad died on a rainy Tuesday in March, Derek and I cried together at his bedside. We held each other in the hospital corridor, two people who just lost the most important person in their world. For about 48 hours, I thought we were going to be okay. I thought grief might actually bring us closer together. I should have paid more attention to the way Derek's tears dried up the moment we started talking about funeral arrangements. The way he immediately started making decisions without consulting me, as if I was just another employee, instead of his sister and equal partner in Dad's business. The funeral was beautiful. Dad would have loved it. Standing room only, with clients, employees, and competitors, all coming to pay their respects to a man who'd built something real in a world full of cheap imitations. Derek gave a speech about continuing Dad's legacy. I spoke about Dad's values, his integrity, his belief that success meant lifting others up along the way. People kept coming up to me afterward, saying things like, "I'm sure your father would be so proud to see you carrying on his work," and "The company's in good hands with you two." I smiled and thanked them, still believing that Derek and I were partners in this new chapter. The betrayal came exactly 3 days later. I was sitting in Dad's office, our office, I thought, reviewing project timelines and trying to figure out how to manage the emotional weight of being in his space without him, when Derek walked in with two men I'd never seen before. "Emma, I need you to clear out your desk," he said, not even bothering with a greeting. "These gentlemen are from HR Solutions. They're here to handle your termination paperwork." I blinked, certain I'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" "You're fired. Effective immediately." Derek's voice was matter-of-fact, like he was discussing the weather. "The company's going in a new direction, and your services are no longer needed." The room started spinning. "Derek, what are you talking about? This is Dad's company, our company. We're supposed to—" "This is my company now," he interrupted, stepping closer to Dad's desk. His desk now, apparently. "I'm the majority owner. I inherited Dad's shares, which gives me controlling interest. And as the new CEO, my first executive decision is eliminating redundant positions." Redundant positions? He called me redundant. One of the HR men cleared his growth. "Ms. Richardson, we'll need you to return any company property, keys, credit cards, access badges. We have a severance package here for you to review." I looked down at the papers he slid across the desk. 2 weeks. 2 weeks! For 8 years of building someone else's dream, and 18 months of basically running the company while my father died and my brother played golf? "This is insane," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Derek, we're family. We're supposed to be doing this together. Dad's gone, Emma. And it's time you faced reality. You've been living in this house, working at this company, playing dress-up as a business executive, but you're not an owner. You're not family in the way that matters. You're an employee, and now you're a former employee." The cruelty in his voice was breathtaking. This wasn't just about business. This was personal. This was about power, about proving something to himself, or to the world, or to the ghost of our father. But here's what Derek didn't know about me. I don't break. I bend, I analyze, I adapt, but I don't break. So I stood up, gathered the personal items from my desk with steady hands, and signed his papers without argument. I shook hands with the HR men, thanked them for their professionalism, and walked out of that office with my head high. Derek followed me to the elevator. "Just so we're clear," he said as I waited for the doors to open, "I want you out of the house by tonight. I'm changing the locks in the morning." I turned to look at him, really look at him, and I saw something that made everything click into place. Fear. Derek was afraid. All this aggression, this cruelty, this desperate power grab, it was coming from a place of deep, gnawing fear. "Of course," I said calmly. "I'll be out by evening." The elevator doors closed, and as I rode down to the ground floor of the building that Dad built, I realized something important. Derek had just made the biggest mistake of his life. See, Derek had always seen me as the emotional one, the people person, the soft touch who handled marketing because I was good with feelings. He thought he was the strategic mind, the business brain, the one who understood how power really worked. But Derek had forgotten something crucial. I was the one who spent 18 months as Dad's primary caregiver and confidant. I was the one who drove him to lawyer meetings when he was too weak to drive himself. I was the one who sat in waiting rooms while Dad updated his will, revised his estate plan, and made sure his affairs were in order. If you've ever felt overlooked by family, hit that subscribe button now, because this story is about to get a whole lot more satisfying. Derek had been so busy positioning himself as the heir apparent that he'd never bothered to ask what Dad was actually planning. That night, I sat in a hotel room with my laptop and a bottle of wine, making phone calls. Not emotional calls, strategic ones. I called our family lawyer, Martin Castellanos, who'd been Dad's friend for 20 years. "Emma, honey, I'm so sorry about your father," Martin said when he picked up. "I was just thinking about calling you. We need to schedule a reading of the will." "Derek seems to think that won't be necessary," I said carefully. "He says he inherited controlling interest in the company." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Emma, has anyone actually read your father's will?" "I assumed Derek had. He seems very confident about the inheritance situation." Another pause, then something that sounded suspiciously like a chuckle. "Can you come to my office tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock? "Of course." "Should I tell Derek?" "Oh, definitely. This should be very interesting." I hung up with a strange feeling in my chest. Not hope exactly, but something that felt like the opposite of defeat. The next morning, I sat in Martin's conference room in my best navy suit, the one Dad always said made me look like I could run the world. Derek strutted in 15 minutes late, clearly annoyed at having to deal with what he obviously considered a formality. "Let's get this over with," Derek said, dropping into a chair. "I've got a meeting with investors at 11. Martin opened a thick folder and pulled out several documents. "Well, this is certainly going to be memorable," he said, and I caught him glancing at me with something that might have been amusement. "Before we begin," Martin continued, "I want to make sure everyone understands that your father was very thorough in his estate planning. He updated his will multiple times over the past 2 years, and the final version was signed just 6 weeks before he passed away." Derek shifted impatiently. Yeah, Dad was thorough. Can we just get to the part where you confirm that I inherit his shares in the company?" Martin looked at Derek for a long moment. "Derek, when exactly do you think your father added you to his will?" "What kind of question is that? I'm a son, his firstborn son. Of course I'm in his will." "But when, specifically, do you think you were added as a beneficiary?" Derek's face was starting to redden. "I don't know, Martin. When I was born. When I started working at the company. What does it matter?" Martin nodded slowly. "It matters because your father and I had many conversations about inheritance over the years, and one thing he was very clear about was that he wanted to leave his legacy to the child who truly understood his values and had earned the right to carry them forward." I felt my heart start to pound, but I kept my face neutral. Derek was looking increasingly agitated. "Just read the damn will," Derek snapped. Martin flipped to a specific page and began to read. "I, Robert James Richardson, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath the entirety of my shares in Richardson and Associates, totaling 65% ownership of the company, to my daughter, Emma Marie Richardson, who has demonstrated the integrity, intelligence, and commitment necessary to honor the values upon which this company was built." The silence in the room was deafening. Derek's face went from red to white in about 3 seconds. That can't be right. Read it again." "This is the moment everything changes. If stories like this give you goosebumps and you love seeing arrogant people get exactly what they deserve, you need to subscribe right now. We share revenge stories this satisfying every week. Martin continued reading. Furthermore, I leave my residence at 1247 Elmwood Drive, along with all personal property contained therein, to my daughter, Emma Marie Richardson. Stop, Derek said, his voice barely controlled. This is some kind of mistake. I'm his son, his heir. I've been running the construction side of the business for 8 years. Martin set down the papers and looked at Derek with something like pity. Derek, there's something else you need to know. Something your father asked me to explain if this situation ever arose. What situation? Derek demanded. The situation where you assumed you were entitled to an inheritance that was never yours to begin with. Martin pulled out another folder, this one thicker than the first. Derek, your father hired a private investigator 18 months ago. He'd been having suspicions for years, but your mother's illness and death delayed his investigation. I watched Derek's face as understanding began to dawn, and I felt a chill run down my spine. The investigation confirmed what your father suspected, Martin continued gently. Derek, you're not Robert Richardson's biological son. The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Derek stood up so fast his chair fell backwards. That's impossible. That's a lie. My mother would never. Your mother had an affair with a man named Marcus Webb in the summer of 1991. The investigator has DNA evidence, hospital records, and testimony from 3 witnesses who knew about the relationship at the time. I stared at Derek, this man I'd called my brother for 28 years, and watched him crumble in real time. But he raised me. He called me his son. He loved you, Martin said firmly. Robert loved you as his own child for over 30 years. But he also believed in honesty, and he believed in leaving his life's work to someone who shared his blood and his values. Derek turned to look at me, and for the first time in days, I saw my brother instead of my enemy. He looked lost, broken, like a child who just learned that everything he believed about himself was a lie. Emma, he said, and his voice cracked on my name. But then something shifted in his expression. The vulnerability disappeared, replaced with rage. This is all your fault. You poisoned him against me. You spent all that time playing nurse, whispering in his ear, turning him against his own. Stop, I said, and my voice cut through his accusations like a blade. Just stop, Derek. I stood up and walked around the table until I was facing him directly.
For 30 years, you were his son in every way that mattered, I said quietly. He loved you. He was proud of you. He gave you every opportunity to prove that you deserved to inherit his legacy. I paused, choosing my next words carefully. But you showed him who you really were, Derek. Not through DNA tests or investigations, but through your choices. You chose golf over hospital visits. You chose networking over being present during the hardest moments of his life. You chose to see his company as your birthright, instead of something to be earned through service and sacrifice. Derek's face was twisted with fury, but I wasn't done. And in the end, you chose to throw me out of my own home and fire me from my own company because you thought power meant crushing the people who loved you. I picked up my copy of the will from Martin's desk. Dad didn't leave me this company because I'm his biological daughter, Derek. He left it to me because I earned it. Every day for 8 years, and especially during the last 18 months of his life, I proved that I understood what he was trying to build. Derek looked like he wanted to hit me. Instead, he stormed toward the door. then turned back one last time. "This isn't over, Emma. I'll contest the will. I'll sue you. I'll destroy you." Martin cleared his throat. "Actually, Derek, you can't contest the will. As a non-biological heir with no legal adoption papers, you have no standing to challenge Robert's estate decisions. And, as of this morning, you're trespassing in a house that belongs to Emma. And you're unlawfully occupying an office in a company where Emma is now the majority owner." Derek's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "I'd suggest you clean out your desk by end of business today," I said calmly. "Security will escort you out after that." And then Derek did something I never expected. He laughed. It was a bitter, broken sound, but it was definitely laughter. "You know what the really funny part is, Emma? I actually thought we were going to do this together. Before I found out about the investigation, before I knew about any of this, there was a part of me that thought maybe we could be partners." He shook his head. "But Dad was right. You do see the whole picture. You saw this coming, didn't you?" I looked at this man who had been my brother, my rival, my family, my enemy, and I felt something unexpected. Sadness. "No, Derek, I didn't see this coming. But I saw you making choices that Dad would never have made, and I knew that eventually choices have consequences." Derek left without another word. Martin and I spent the next 3 hours going through financial documents, corporate structures, and transition procedures. By the time I walked out of his office, I wasn't just Emma Richardson, displaced daughter and unemployed marketing director. I was Emma Richardson, majority owner and CEO of Richardson and Associates. The first thing I did was drive to the company offices. Derek's car was already gone from the parking lot, but there was a security guard waiting for me at the front door. "Miss Richardson, I'm Tom Bradley from Executive Security Services. Mr. Castellanos hired us to handle the transition. We've changed all the locks and updated all the access codes. Here are your new keys." I walked through the building I'd worked in for 8 years, but now I was seeing it with different eyes. The employees who greeted me, some with confusion, some with knowing smiles, some with obvious relief, weren't just colleagues anymore. They were my responsibility. Dad's office felt different now, too. Not like a shrine to someone who was gone, but like a workspace waiting for someone to fill it. I sat down in his chair, my chair now, and looked at the family photo on the desk. Dad, Mom, Derek, and me, at some long ago Christmas, all of us smiling like we believed the good times would last forever. I picked up the phone and dialed the number for our biggest client, Morrison Development. "Hi, Mr. Morrison, this is Emma Richardson. I'm calling to let you know about some leadership changes at Richardson and Associates, and to personally assure you that all your projects will continue without interruption." It took me 3 weeks to fully understand what Derek had been planning. Going through company records, I found evidence of inflated budgets, skimmed profits, and vendor kickback schemes that would have eventually destroyed everything Dad built. Derek hadn't just been planning to inherit the company, he'd been planning to strip mine it. But he'd also underestimated the loyalty Dad had built among our employees. One by one, people came to me with information, with concerns they'd had about Derek's management style, with relief that someone was finally in charge who understood Dad's vision for the company. 3 months after that meeting in Martin's office, Richardson and Associates posted the most profitable quarter in company history. We landed 2 major contracts that Derek's aggressive tactics had nearly cost us, and we implemented profit-sharing programs that made every employee a stakeholder in our success. Doesn't it feel so good when the right person wins? If you're sitting there with the biggest smile because Emma is absolutely crushing it, subscribe now and like this video. Derek tried to contest the will, just like he'd threatened. His lawsuit lasted exactly 6 weeks before his own lawyer advised him to drop it. Turns out when you have no legal standing and no evidence of wrongdoing, courts tend to dismiss your case pretty quickly. I heard through the industry grapevine that he'd started his own construction company using money from Marcus Webb, his real father, apparently. I also heard that 3 of his first clients fired him for cost overruns and missed deadlines. Some people asked me if I felt bad about what happened to Derek, if I regretted the way things turned out. Here's what I told them. I didn't destroy Derek's life. Derek destroyed Derek's life. I just refused to let him destroy mine in the process. 6 months after Dad's funeral, I was working late in my office when Tom Bradley knocked on my door. "Miss Richardson, there's someone here to see you. Says it's personal." Derek walked into my office looking like he had aged 5 years and 6 months. His suit was cheaper than the ones he used to wear, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Hello, Emma." Derek. He sat down across from my desk, the same desk he'd fired me from all those months ago. "I came to apologize," he said quietly. "I waited. I was wrong. About everything. The way I treated you, the way I treated Dad toward the end, the way I thought I could just take what I wanted because I thought I deserved it." He looked around the office, taking in the changes I'd made, the employee recognition board, the photos from company events, the mission statement Dad wrote that I had framed and mounted on the wall. He said, "You were right. Dad didn't leave you this company because of DNA. He left it to you because you earned it." Derek stood up to leave, then turned back one last time. "For what it's worth, I think he'd be proud of what you've done with the place." After he left, I sat in my office thinking about forgiveness, about family, about the difference between the family you're born into and the family you choose to become. I thought about Dad and how he'd spent 30 years loving a son who wasn't his biological child because love isn't about blood, it's about choice. And in the end, he'd chosen to leave his legacy to the person who had chosen to honor it.
2 years later, Richardson and Associates employs 43 people, operates in 3 states, and has never missed a deadline or gone over budget on a single project. We've been named Best Places to Work by our state's business journal for 2 years running. Derek's company went bankrupt last winter. I don't take pleasure in his failure, but I don't feel guilty about my success either, because here's what I learned from the whole experience. Sometimes the most powerful form of revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's becoming so successful that their betrayal becomes irrelevant. Every morning when I walk into the office that Dad built and I've grown, I remember what he used to say. Success isn't about beating the competition, Emma. It's about building something so good that the competition becomes irrelevant. Derek thought he was fighting me for control of a company, but I wasn't fighting Derek. I was building something bigger than both of us. And in the end, the person who builds always wins over the person who just tries to take. Dad would have been proud of that lesson. I think he knew I'd figure it out eventually. After all, I always could see the whole picture. If you loved and enjoyed this story, do not forget to hit that subscribe button, like this video, and share it. Until our next update, take care.